right, our agenda is going to be, we're going to talk a little bit about what's required to process your W-2s. We're going to talk about electronic filing thresholds. We're going to talk about Atrix and which forms you need, tips and information for reconciling your data, and of course, frequently asked questions that I get asked quite a lot. I'm going to go through those. All right, so at the baseline, the first thing you need to know is what's going to be required to process your W-2s from Sage 100 or Sage 100 Cloud. You do have to be current on your software maintenance plan with Sage in order to process through Atrix. Because Sage 100 Payroll is a subscription based license, you have to be up to date on that to even use Payroll. You should be up to date on your maintenance plan, so you should be covered there. You also have to have an active internet connection because it does go out and get information from Atrix while you are processing your W-2s. As far as the minimum supported version of Payroll that you're going to need for your W-2s, Sage indicated that they are releasing on December 15th Payroll 2.23.0. This particular update is going to have some preparations for year-end forms processing so that it can route the data properly from the Sage program into Atrix. It also will contain additional updates from state or local governments that any last-minute changes they may have enacted or maybe going into effect, and mappings for those. So those updates would not likely be available in your 2.22.3 or prior payroll versions. So you definitely want to get up to date on your payroll version and get it up to 2.23.0. If you have third-party enhancements where it might not be possible to update to payroll 2.23.0, and there shouldn't be very many of those that would be impacted by payroll update, but if by chance you do have a third-party enhancement where it is not going to be possible to get to the 2.23.0 level on payroll, you'll just want to make sure you plan to do a very thorough reconciliation and testing of the data that goes from Sage into Atrix to make sure that it is going into the correct place and is reporting as it's supposed to be. Because an installation could overwrite an enhancement or a customization, we would like for you to contact our offices for assistance on installing, the update for payroll. We just want to make sure that you have a seamless, continuation of your customization and enhancements and make sure that nothing is disturbed by the installation. If you are on payroll, if you're on Sage 100 2017 or prior, that means you are on the legacy payroll, and those versions are no longer supported. So if you're on a legacy payroll version, you should contact our offices so that we can discuss how we can assist you with your reporting. The next thing that you will need is that payroll tax update, the one that you get prompted for from Sage while you're processing throughout the year. Whenever Sage releases an update, those updates are the information that Sage keeps in their tax cloud. Also, they call it the CLAD. That's the information where they change information in tables and then they push down the tax update to you. That's the program itself will prompt you that there are tax updates to be installed, and you should be keeping up with that. In order to do the installation, you do have to have permissions allowed in your role maintenance. And so it will install, if you have the permissions and you say, yes, I want to install, as long as you don't have payroll entry in progress, it will allow you to install that. So my recommendation is whenever it prompts you, as long as you have permission and as long as you don't have payroll in progress, you should always be allowing those payroll tax updates to be installed. That keeps you up to date on the tax rates and things like that. If by some chance you are prompted and you can't do the installation, either your role doesn't have the permission, or maybe you have a company that does have payroll in progress, you can go back and manually request the update. You can do that through the payroll module utilities menu. There is a selection there for payroll tax update, and that will allow you, again, as long as you've got the role permissions, it will allow you to install as you click on that. Once it does install, just a reminder, review your payroll tax update report, take a look at it, see what was added. Is it something that impacts you? If it does, is there any additional setup that you may need to do? Are there any changes you may need to account for? If you find something and think that you're impacted and you're not sure what you need to do, just give us a call and we'll help you out. Once you are ready to generate your W-2s, you do have to have what we call the Atrix software. Depending on what version of Sage 100 you have, on the menu, it's called e-filing and reporting. On newer versions, I believe it says tax reporting, that is located on your payroll period end menu. So the Atrix software is a separate install, so it does have to be installed on your computer. And then once it is installed, Atrix, because they keep track of the most recent and approved tax forms, it does have a mechanism that it does load the most recent forms to your workstation. So when you are generating your reports from Atrix, it does always do a check to make sure that you have the most recent forms. In order to allow the download and installation of any of the forms from Atrix, your user does have to have sufficient Windows permissions. And I know we've got some clients where the security within their organization does not allow them to do installations. So you may need to enlist your IT person to help you get those installed. But that is going to be something that would be required, is the updated Atrix forms. And you may need assistance from your IT to make sure that those get loaded. Atrix generally releases their federal forms for year end, usually between December 15th and 20th. So if you go out there now, it probably is still going to have the 2021 forms, but usually between the 15th and the 20th of December, they do release the new forms. And they also, because Atrix does allow processing of more than 300 and I believe it's 330 federal, state, and local forms, they continue to release updated and approved forms generally throughout January. Sometimes they are new releases, and sometimes there are things that they need to correct on some things. So as many times as you go into Atrix between December and January, probably just about every time you go in, you are likely to be prompted for forms updates. So just be prepared for that. So again, if you have to enlist your IT person, you might want to put their number on speed dial or give them a heads up when you're going to need assistance with that. So let's talk about electronic filing thresholds. So back in 2019, there was the Taxpayer First Act of 2019. And one of the things that it did was it started reducing the return requirement to require electronic filing. So it was 250, and then it was, I think the next step was supposed to be 100, and then after that it was 10. But and last year when I was doing my research, I saw that it was supposed to be around the 100 mark. But when I did my research further this year, it appears that the IRS didn't release regulations or an article explaining the change. And so at this point, from my research, it looks like federal reporting is still at the 250 or more recipient level. I do encourage you to double check with your CPA to verify that. I included my link to the IRS website where I found that information. As far as Kentucky is concerned, on the state side, if you have 26 or more withholding statements, and that could be W-2s, of course, or if you have any 1099s where you've had withholding, if you have 26 or more of those forms combined, then they do require you to electronically file. And I also included the link where I found that information. I'm not sure about other states, so you might need to check with your state agency or your CPA if you need to know the electronic filing thresholds for other states. So let's talk a minute or two about some reconciliation tips. I recommend for folks, before they get to the point where they're ready to generate their W-2s, I do recommend doing some reconciliation steps. Part of it is, obviously in Sage, you've got where you have processed your payroll, and then that data has to transport over to Atrix. And we want to make sure that the data that you're seeing in Atrix is the correct data. So what I recommend is that you generate two reports here. The first one being your quarterly tax report for the fourth quarter, so that you can get the year-to-date gross wage information, and also generate your deduction reports so that you can obtain any year-to-date deduction values that might reduce your taxable wages. Another reason that you might want to have the deduction report also is if you have additional things that you need to report in your box 12 or box 14. So go ahead and have those at the ready. Go ahead and make a calculation of the subject wages. So I'll talk about that here in just a second. And then take a test drive in Atrix. With the Atrix tax reporting, when you go in and you say that you want to do W-2s, you have the option of doing a test drive of the first 25 employees, a test drive of all employees, or if you're ready to go ahead and do your processing. With the test drive, it generates the same information that you would see if you were processing live, but it doesn't save any data, but it will allow you to see the information as it would appear. So I would recommend sometime in the next week or two is to go ahead and do a test drive. Generate your quarterly tax reports, generate your deduction reports, calculate your subject wages, and then generate that test drive and see if the information that you see in Atrix matches what your calculations are. And remember, when you are reconciling your wages, of course, on your quarterly tax report, you've got your gross wages, but on your W-2 with Atrix, box 1 is going to be your subject wages. Just remember that the subject wages are essentially the gross wages less any pre-tax deductions. So when you're looking at your tax information in your deduction report, remember that cafeteria plan and pension plan deductions are the only types of deductions that that impact the taxable wage base. If you have a deduction that is set as a standard deduction, those don't impact your taxable wage base. So, and not all pension plan deductions reduce your taxable wage base. Case in point, on a 401k, some companies have regular 401k and they also offer a Roth 401k. And you know, Roth is an after-tax deduction, whereas a regular 401k is a pre-tax deduction. So when you're looking through your deduction list, you will need to know which ones of your deductions are in fact pre-tax in order to do your calculation. Remember, federal wages can be reduced by cafeteria plan and some pension plan deductions, again, those that are set as pre-tax. And your Social Security wages are reduced by pension plan deductions, again, pre-tax, as well as Medicare wages are reduced by those as well. As far as state wages, they are also often reduced by the cafeteria plan and pension plan deductions as the federal government goes, but that can vary by state. In Kentucky, Kentucky tends to follow along the same path that the federal government uses in terms of determining what your subject wages are. So what happens if you do your calculations, you do your test drive, and you find on Atrix that the subject wages don't tie out to what you've calculated? Obviously, you might have a little bit of variance because of rounding, but let's say that it's significant enough that you know that it's not rounding. What are some things that may cause a variance in your subject wages? The first thing that could cause a problem are the tax rules that are selected on the deductions when they are set up. When you set up your deductions, you select a tax rule that kind of tells you how that deduction is supposed to behave in relation to pre-tax and post-tax calculations. If a tax rule was incorrectly selected, it may not have reduced your wages as you expected it to, or vice versa. Maybe it reduced when you didn't expect it to. So that could be one of the reasons why you might see a difference there. Or if the tax rule on a deduction got changed sometime during the middle of the year. You could have part of the year where it was pre-tax and then the other part of the year that wasn't, or vice versa. So tax rules, very important and do play a part on the calculations. Also, on the new payroll framework, if you've got a payroll check reversal, you should be using the one-click reversal button there in payroll data entry. If you had a reversal and you did not use the one-click reversal button and instead went through the old, tedious, time-consuming manual entry of negative amounts like you had to do in the legacy payroll, that could also cause some variances on the calculation of subject wages. So if you find that you have a variance and you know that there was a reversal on that particular individual and you need us to help you sort that out, do give us a call and we'll help get that information straightened out because the old manual entry on reversals does not work properly on the new payroll framework. And lastly, if you entered a check and selected manual taxes and you keyed in wages incorrectly on there, it could also, again, impact your calculations on your subject wages. So just some things, ways that you might find that there causes for differences that you might see. So one calculation is going to be looking at your subject wages and make sure that the subject wages are correct. Also, on the flip side of that is the tax liability, your Social Security, your Medicare, and your local taxes, and what is generated by Atrix. So just as a mathematical calculation, Social Security is 6.2%. The wage-based limit is $147,000 for 2022. So do the math, see if the withholding that you see in Atrix, the grand total is correct, or very near it. Again, you might have some rounding variances. Medicare is at 1.45%. And for any earners that exceed 200,000, they have to pay an additional 0.9% for the wages in excess of 200,000. Keep in mind that that extra 0.9% is employee only. So if you're comparing the employee Medicare withholding versus the Medicare that calculation that you see for the employer's expense, you might see variances there if you've got earners that exceed 200,000. Also, if you're going through your test drive, you might see this. If you're going through the next step verification, where it steps you through verifying the various pieces of data, if you have an employee whose Social Security or Medicare withholding amount differs by more than $1 from what the program calculates based on their specified subject wages, it's going to give you a warning. So that might help you look a little bit closer at some potential issues there, is by going through that test drive and see if any warnings are generated. I do recommend, I know we're here in the first week of December, I do recommend that you do a test drive prior to the last payroll of the year. So if you do find an employee that needs an adjustment for over or under withholding for whatever the case may be, then you have at least a payroll left in the year that you can make those corrections. So I do recommend trying to do a test run prior to the last payroll of the year. And I wanted to throw out one reminder also for any of you guys that have non-cash taxable fringe benefits that you need to record in your payroll data. Make sure you get that in before your last payroll of the year so that it will properly calculate the required withholdings for your employee. The one question I get pretty frequently is, do we still have to create the historical company copy? Keep in mind, back in the legacy payroll, we used to make the historical company copies before you could do your period end processing. And the reason for that was the period end processing in the legacy payroll, it would remove some data that you would need to do to generate your W-2. So that it wasn't ideal to do your period end processing before you had your W-2s done. But for timing purposes, most companies weren't able to generate W-2s in between their last payroll of the year and the first payroll of the next year. So that's why we would make the historical company copy so that we could still generate those W-2s in the time frame that you had available to do reconciliations and get those things done, but still be able to go and proceed with your processing for the new year. So we had to do that. That was the only way we could maintain and have access to the data so that it didn't get overwritten and removed. In the new payroll 2. Whatever, again, we're going to be at 2.23 when we do the latest update. In the new payroll does not necessarily remove any data at period end processing, with one exception. There is a setting in your payroll settings that you tell the system how many years of payroll history you want to maintain and retain. And so that setting is, if you go into payroll and then the setup menu, payroll options, on the payroll options, tab 6 is your history tab, and there is a setting there for the number of years of history. Now, what that does is when you do period end processing, it looks at the data records, and any of those data records that are older than the number of years of history that you're retaining, it will purge those. So you definitely want to review that setting before you do your period end processing. Make sure that you are keeping the number of years of history that you want to keep. So the period end processing, the only thing that it will do is it will purge records that have aged out beyond the number of years that you want to retain history. Otherwise, all the data stays there. So all the current year that you just finished, it will remain there. And so you don't have to make the historical company copy, but you do want to review that setting so that you're not inadvertently purging years that you might want to keep. One thing I did want to throw out here, it's not a question that we get asked, but it is something that we do recommend. When you are e-filing your forms, and that would include your W-2s, your 1094s, 1095s, your 941s, your 1099s, all those types of forms that you process through Atrix. If you're e-filing those, you should run those in your live company and not the company copy. So even if you choose to make a historical company copy, make sure that you are e-filing your forms from your live company so that the e-filing archive is kept together under the same database. The reason I say that is just a few weeks back, I had to assist someone with a correction from a few years back. And when I went to look for their filing, it was not under their live company. So I had to hunt it down and figure out which historical company had that information and then find that e-filing so that we could then make the correction to it. If you do it from your live company, you always have those records all together in the same archive and they're not split up. And that helps ensure that you're not inadvertently getting rid of any of your old archives for that reason. So just throwing that out there, process your Atrix e-filing from your live company. The next question I normally get is, do I have to run my W-2s before I do period end processing? Again, the old legacy version, that was one way to do it, was to run W-2s before you did your period end processing. If you didn't do that, then you had to make the company copy. But with the new version, again, the data table that holds that e-filing information does not necessarily remove the records unless they age out beyond the number of years of history that you have decided to maintain. So you don't have to run your W-2s before you do period end processing. So can I run payroll for January before running period end processing for the end of the year? Well, it is possible in the new payroll to run a payroll in the new year before running the year end or period end processing for the old year. But it is best practice to make sure that you are completing final postings and do your period end processing before you close, before you put in entries for the new year. Now, again, timing, it's not always possible. I mean, the week before Christmas and New Year's is pretty tight. And if you've got a weekly payroll, it makes it even tighter with the holidays. So if it's not possible to run your period end processing, just know that if you run the new payroll, period end processing does adjust some fields like your year-to-date and accrual calculations. So if you have time off accruals or deduction goals, for example, you know, a goal limit on a deduction, for example, those types of things won't get reset when you generate your pay stubs. So your pay stubs might not correctly reflect the new year, zeroed out, fresh start. So just know that if you aren't able to do that, your pay stubs, if you've got vacation accruals on there or deductions that have goals, it may not reflect accurately on those stubs. So do you have to e-file in order to even use Atrix? And the answer to that is no. Printing, I tell people you can print for free all day long in Atrix, but if you are required to e-file or you choose you want to e-file, they are going to charge you a fee to process that, and you do have to register with them to do that. In order to register with them, if this is your first year that you're going to be e-filing, you will need to register at efile.atrix.com. It's really simple. If you are familiar with your company's information, you can do it pretty quickly. It will prompt you to generate a user name, and I do recommend that you keep the name generic because that username is going to be associated with the company. It's not necessarily associated with a person. So if I'm Jane Doe and I'm setting up my company ABC Corp, it is better to set up the user ID as ABC Corp e-filing as the username versus Jane Doe. Because if Jane Doe decides to retire or take a different position or even leave the company, that user ID login is going to remain with the company. So just keep it kind of generic so that it is not related to a specific person. I often get asked, well, how much do they charge? If you want to check out their fees, you can do that on the website atrix.com/partners/Sage100 They list for individual processings. Note if you have many different forms you are planning to e-file, or if you've got multiple companies, they do offer bundled pricing options. And obviously with bundles, they generally have a price break on that. So what you see on the fees listed on the website, if you've got a bundled option, it would likely be less than that. In terms of forms, you have two options. Do you want Atrix to generate the forms and mail them to the recipients for you, or are you going to print them yourself? So depending on the number of W-2s you have, I will say that I've had several clients tell me, and totally unsolicited, that for them, they have actually found it more cost effective for Atrix to do the entire full service print and mail and e-file for them than if they tried to print and mail them themselves and then e-file. So if you are required to e-file, I would definitely consider having the full service with Atrix because it literally is only slightly more than the e-filing cost to have them print and mail it. But obviously you would have to, weigh the options there if that makes more sense to you. But I have had many of our clients that do the full service with Atrix tell me that they love it and it has saved them a lot of time and money. So that's something you should definitely consider. If you decide you want to print the forms yourself and mail them yourself, Atrix generates the forms for you, but it is in the format where you would need blank perforated 4-up forms. So if I call it the quad format. So if you take a piece of paper and you draw a line down the center and then across the center, and you've got that quad format, that is the format that the Atrix forms will print in. Atrix does not print the classic pre-printed 2-part format. So do not get the old classic pre-printed forms because Atrix is not going to print in that format. The reason you need the blank forms is because the Atrix program generates not only the data that goes on the forms, but it also generates the grid and the verbiage of the forms as well. So you will want to have blank perforated 4-up format forms. Atrix forms, I will just point out, are print and sign compliant. So again, they generate the grids and everything for you. I also wanted to point out that IRS regulations do require that employee copies of the W-2, that's copy B, C, and then 2 copies of the Form 2, as well as the recipient copy of the 1099, they have to be printed on perforated paper. And so I've got the IRS publications listed there, but just pointing out that the IRS regulations do say that it has to be on perforated paper. Sage does have an extension that has that they offer forms and checks and things like that that you can get from them. You absolutely are not required to get any forms from Sage, but they do carry the forms. So if you're having trouble sourcing it from your local providers, you can order from Sage. Again, you are not required to. If you go to sagechecks.com and want to search for the blank perforated 4-up forms, I've got the search words there for you. I would search under W-2 blank 4-up, the W-2 blank 4-up, because the item number, if you put the item number in there, I have not gotten the item number to populate the search. So I've included here the item number for the bundle that would contain the W-2 4-up forms with the pre-printed instructions on the back and the corresponding envelopes. Again, entering the item number, though, doesn't show up in my search when I try it. So when I've tried to search for it, I've always searched for the W-2 blank 4-up, and it has populated there. So in terms of if you are trying to determine how much of the perforated blank 4-up, forms, or how many are you going to need, and so forth, let's talk about what prints on the perforated paper and then what prints on plain paper. So on the W-2 side, copies B, C, and 2 copies of the Form 2, when you're printing the employee version, those have to go on the blank 4-up perforated format forms with the notice on the back. So one employee gets a full sheet that contains copy B, C, and 2 of the copy 2s, and the notice is on the back. The federal W-2 and W-3, they don't want that on the perforated paper. They want that to be on the blank paper. So those you will print to your regular plain paper. As far as the state is concerned, when you print the state copy, it prints 4 employees per sheet. The Atrix system, or it has in the past, I haven't checked obviously this year because they haven't released the new forms, but Atrix historically has prompted you to put in the blank 4-part perforated paper when you are printing the state copy. But you might want to check with your state agency for their specific requirements. I know in Kentucky, we don't have to print that on perforated paper. So in Kentucky, it can go on blank paper, but if you are not sure about your state, you should check with your CPA or your state agency to find out if it has to be on the perforated paper or not. And then of course yours can print to plain paper because it's your copy. And personally, I wouldn't want to have perforated reports in my files because I wouldn't want them to tear apart. And when it does print your copy of the W-2, it prints 4 employees per sheet. So if you're printing that to plain paper, the number of employees divided by 4, and that's the number of pieces of paper you're going to need. If we talk about Affordable Care Act reporting, that's the 1094 and 1095s. Of course, there are the B forms and the C forms. Sage forms also, Sage Checks also has those forms. Again, I've included the part numbers, but again, I can't get those forms to populate when I do a search on the part number, but I've always just searched on 1095 blank, and it will populate the options of the 1094, or excuse me, 1095B and 1095C, and you would select whichever one you need for your filing, the B forms or the C forms. The federal and employer copies can be printed to plain paper on the 1094 and 1095. And then also, just as a note, if you are using Atrix e-filing and reporting to print your ACA 1095 forms, they did design their template on the 1095 forms so that you can use the same W-2 envelope that you use for your Atrix generated W-2s, the ones that are in the quad format, so that the address, the employee name and address will align to those same envelopes. So if you have, if you want to buy, more of the envelopes, you can just buy the same part number with more, a larger quantity if you're sending them out separately. Or if you're combining the forms in the same envelope, it wouldn't matter which form you put on the top when you're stuffing it. So that might help you reduce time and or reduce costs. So if you need year-end assistance, if you need us to help walk you through things, it's your first time, maybe you've had personnel change, maybe you've added additional companies, or have something different you want us to help you with it, we certainly would love to help you. Our year-end assistance is done by scheduled appointment only. I know that we have sent out emailers, I think either went out yesterday or today even, to remind people to schedule your appointment. We have those requests that if you have requested previously and we've not scheduled with you, be patient with us. Normally at the top of November, we get information from Sage about what is going to be required for year-end processing, and we know that information well in advance, but Sage didn't release that to us until nearly the end of November. So we are working through our requests to see what our clients are needing so that we can schedule appointments, that are specific to you. So if you have submitted and you haven't heard from us, be patient. We are still working through those, and it's only because we got late notice from Sage on what they are going to require. I did want to mention to you guys that we do have some office closures for the holiday, half a day on the Friday before Christmas, and then the Monday, December 26th for the Christmas holiday, and then repeating that same pattern the next week for New Year, half day on Friday, and then close Monday, January 2nd in observance of New Year. So our offices will be closed during that time. If you happen to need to schedule update installation or want additional assistance, we should have in the chat a link on to be able to complete the online request form for us to be able to help you on that. For additional questions that you might have, you can email to technical support, and we'll be glad to help you with that. If there are questions now, I'll be glad to try to facilitate those questions now.
Christy, there was a question earlier and you may have answered it. I just wanted to scroll back and double check. It was, is there electronic delivery of forms for employees or all paper?
You have the option, that is a good question. You have the option, if you are doing the full service with Atrix, one of the options is to have the forms electronically delivered. Keep in mind, if you're doing that, that's going to put an extra onus for you to obtain all the email addresses, and I'm not sure what all else might be involved in terms of uh, password and access protection might be involved. I will say in the past, we have had 0 clients that have gone through that process. And again, most of that is because of the extra amount of work to provide the email addresses and whatever additional instruction to the recipients. And then January being a very, very busy time for most accounting folks, not wanting to field the extra questions that usually come along with that. So I am not sure of the full breadth of what might be involved, although I know that it will put an extra onus on you to provide that information if you are going to offer that. It is included with your full service bundle with Atrix if you do that. And also I wanted to mention that if you are only providing electronic copies and you are not providing paper, I do know that the IRS has a release form that you have to have your employees sign. Now you could still send them paper copies and still offer the electronic copy, and that's fine. But if you are only doing electronic copies, you do have to have a signed release from your recipients acknowledging that they're okay with that. And there is a place in your employee maintenance to designate that you've received the signed release form for that. Good question.
Yes, and it looks like the other question we have is the presentation going to be available via email? And you will get a copy of the recording, and Christy, if it's okay, I can send out the presentation too.
Yes, that'll be fine.
Okay, yes, we will do that.
Right. If there's not any more questions, then that would conclude everything we have for you today. Feel free to, if you think of something later, just email our technical support address there and we'll be glad to circle back with you. I appreciate your time spending this afternoon with us and hopefully getting you a little prepared for what's down the bend.